The one on your paper donated was, don't I? Here's what I need you to do. I need you to turn to one or two neighbors in a whisper. I need you to tell them what an ecosystem is, but use our dance, okay? In a whisper. Elizabeth, I haven't seen you do it. Thanks. Very good. Everybody's plants? So an ecosystem is living organisms. What's an example of a living organism, Elizabeth? I'm sorry? A fish. A fish, good. And non-living organisms, what's one, Yaya? Like a rock, good. And they work together in an ecosystem, right? Very, very good. So this right here, we looked at this picture a lot this week. What kind of an ecosystem is this, Colin? Coastal ecosystem, right? Because we've got land meeting water, and you can see all of the living and non-living organisms in our picture. So we also talked a little bit about some changes that can occur in the ecosystems. And changes usually have what kind of results? I'm thinking of three things that can happen to a living organism as a result of a change. Madeline, what's one? Think about your little charts that you filled out on the science worksheet. Organisms might change. They do change, but tell me some ways that they change. What happens, for example, if all of a sudden a plant dies? If a plant dies that lots of living organisms rely on for food, what might happen to that other organism, Sarah? It'll perish. It will perish. And perish means what, Dusty? Perish means... Ask a friend. Perish means... 3, 2, 1.
Perish means to die.
To die, right? If we lose a food source in an ecosystem, something might perish, or it might die. Okay, now what is the opposite of perish? If something lives, we call it, Courtney? Thrive. Thrive, and there's another word that rhymes with it. One, survive. Thrive and survive. That means that it lives, and then it also grows, and it increases, and it gets better. That's what thrive means. Okay, survive is just to live, but to thrive is to grow and to increase the population. Speaking of which, can someone tell me what a population is? Corinne, what's a population?
How many one type there is?
Bingo. How many of one type of living organism we have in a certain place. So, an organism can thrive and survive given a change. It can also perish. There's one more thing that might happen. Who remembers what that third change is? Yes, ma'am.
Me?
Yes, Corinne. Sorry. Move. It can move. Think about, remember we talked about how if we construct a building, if all of a sudden in a forest, some builders decide to create a neighborhood, what's going to happen to all of those organisms that used to live in the forest once the houses come, Nathalie? They might perish. If they lose enough food, they might perish, but it's more likely that over time they will eventually, what, Diego? Think about if you got kicked out of your house. Would you die?
No.
Not necessarily. You would probably just... You would help him out. Brayden? Think about it. If your family, if your habitat, if your home was no longer available to you and you had to leave, what do people do when they don't have a house anymore? They have to move. Right, Diego? Say move. Or they might. It's another change. If they don't move, they die. What do we call that? Perish. Or they might, what, Yvonne? They get better. They grow. What's that word? Got to work on us thrive and survive, right? Okay, so now that we've talked about this, I want to go back to something we talked about on Wednesday about a change that occurs in ecosystems, especially coastal ecosystems. I think it was Colin that was telling me about these boats. Brandon, you need to bring out these boats. He was talking about a change that occurs in coastal ecosystems as a result of some non-living organisms that usually results in a lot of species perishing. What was that event? What was he referring to? What sometimes happens with these boats? Boats have lots of what inside them? Oil. And so if there is an accident involving those boats, what's likely to happen, Jonah?
There's going to be an oil. The oil is going to spill all over.
Exactly. And is that good for the population? No. They're very likely to what? Perish, right? Now, it was very interesting that Colin made that comment because I'm not sure if you guys know, this happened very, very recently, very close to Texas. Did you guys know that? So there was a major oil spill in 2010, almost 3 years ago, on the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, which is like it's not really an ocean, it's like a stretch of water, salt water, that separates the United States from Mexico. And there was a giant spill that continued. It actually wasn't a spill so much as an explosion. Because I'm not sure if you know how oil is drilled, but there's lots of ocean. I'm sorry, what am I saying? There's lots of oil under the crust below the ocean. Remember how we talked about the different types of crust? Yeah. Continental crust, and what was the other one called?
Oh.
Yes.
Outer mantle and inner mantle.
Now we're talking about the crust. Just the top layer. There's two kinds. Sarah? Continental and oceanic. Oceanic. Bingo. Now, under both of those types of crust, we have a lot of oil. But the problem is that there's not very much under the continental crust. There's a lot more under the oceanic crust. But do you remember which one is deeper? Which one is thicker? Oceanic or continental? Risa, do you remember? What's that?
Continental.
Not the continental. Natalie? Oceanic. The oceanic crust is much, much deeper underground than the continental. So when we ran out of oil from the continental crust, we had to go to the ocean and dig a well way at the bottom of the ocean floor. And not only that, but if here is, grab a marker. If this is the top of the ocean, and this is the the oceanic crust, like this ocean floor. To get the oil that our world needs, people have to dig wells that go about